Thomas Matthews adopted 7 black children that no one wanted. 10 years later, these children have grown into remarkable young adults, shaped by his unwavering love and sacrifice. But when a sudden crisis threatens to destroy everything he's built, the way they repay him will leave him in tears and change their family forever. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today. And if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. Thomas Matthews stood at the large window of his apartment, gazing out at the twinkling city lights below. At 45 years old, he had achieved everything he'd ever dreamed of in his career. As a top financial advisor, his expertise was sought after by some of the wealthiest clients in the city. Yet, as he stood there in his tailored suit, a glass of expensive whiskey in hand, Thomas felt an emptiness that no amount of success could fill. He turned away from the window, his eyes scanning the spacious living room. The sleek furniture and modern art pieces that adorned the walls suddenly seemed cold and impersonal. Thomas sighed heavily, setting down his glass on a nearby table. "Is this really all there is?" he murmured to himself, his voice barely audible in the quiet apartment. Thomas had always been driven, focused on climbing the corporate ladder and building his reputation in the finance world. But now, as he approached middle age, he realized he had neglected other aspects of his life. He had never married, never had children. The thought of a family of his own had always seemed like something he'd get around to someday. But someday had never come, and now he found himself alone in a home that felt far too big for just one person. Restless, Thomas walked over to his desk and picked up a framed photo. It was a picture of him with his parents, taken years ago at his college graduation. His mother's proud smile and his father's firm hand on his shoulder reminded him of the love and support he'd always had. But now, with both of them gone, Thomas felt the absence of that familial warmth more acutely than ever. Seeking to fill the void in his life, Thomas had recently started volunteering at local charities. He remembered his first day at the city's food bank, feeling awkward and out of place in his expensive clothes among the other volunteers in their casual wear. But as he worked alongside them, handing out meals and chatting with those in need, Thomas felt a spark of something he hadn't experienced in years, a sense of purpose beyond his career. Now every weekend, Thomas found himself looking forward to these volunteer sessions. Whether it was serving at soup kitchens, helping at animal shelters, or participating in community cleanup events, he threw himself into these activities with the same dedication he applied to his work. As he stood in his lonely apartment, Thomas thought about the elderly woman he had helped at the senior center last Saturday. Her grateful smile and the way she had patted his hand, thanking him for taking the time to listen to her stories, had warmed his heart in a way that no business deal ever had. Thomas walked over to his calendar, hanging pristinely on the wall. His finger traced over the neatly penciled-in volunteer commitments for the coming weeks. These simple acts of kindness were becoming the highlights of his life, bringing a sense of fulfillment that had been missing for so long. Yet as he looked around his empty home once more, Thomas couldn't shake the feeling that there was still something more he could do, some greater purpose he could serve. The longing for a family, for deeper connections, tugged at his heart. He just wasn't sure how to bridge the gap between the life he had built and the life he now realized he wanted. The following Saturday, Thomas found himself at the community shelter, his sleeves rolled up as he helped serve lunch to those in need. The bustling atmosphere of the shelter was a stark contrast to his quiet apartment, and he found comfort in the chatter and activity around him. As he ladled soup into bowls, Thomas noticed a young girl, no more than 16, chasing after a small boy who was darting between tables. Her face was a mix of exasperation and worry as she called out, "Jamal, come back here." Suddenly, the girl collided with Thomas, nearly knocking the ladle from his hand. He stumbled back, managing to steady himself and the girl before any soup spilled. "Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry," the girl exclaimed, her eyes wide with embarrassment. Thomas smiled warmly. "No harm done. Are you all right?" The girl nodded, her gaze darting around the room. "Yes, thank you. I'm just trying to catch my little brother before he causes any trouble." Thomas noticed the worry lines creasing her young forehead. I'm Thomas, he said, extending his hand. What's your name? Atisa, she replied, shaking his hand briefly before her eyes locked onto her brother again. I'm sorry, I really need to. Of course, Thomas said, understanding. Go ahead. As Atisa turned to leave, Thomas felt compelled to ask, Are you here often? I don't think I've seen you before. Atisa paused, her expression clouding. We've been coming more lately. It's been hard since our parents passed. Thomas's heart clenched at the sadness in her voice. I'm so sorry to hear that. My siblings and I, Atisa explained, her voice lowering. There are 7 of us. I'm the oldest. Thomas's eyes widened in surprise. 7? That must be challenging. Atisa nodded, her shoulders sagging slightly. It is. Especially now that... She trailed off, biting her lip. Now that what? Thomas gently prompted. Atisa's eyes filled with tears. The foster care system. They're talking about separating us. We don't have any other family, and they say it's too difficult to keep us all together. Thomas felt a wave of empathy wash over him. The thought of these siblings being torn apart after losing their parents was heartbreaking. That must be terrifying for all of you, he said softly. Atisa nodded, wiping at her eyes. I'm trying my best to keep us together, but it's so hard. I'm only 16 and I don't know how much longer I can... Atisa! A small voice called out, interrupting their conversation. The little boy from earlier was tugging at Atisa's sleeve. I'm sorry, I have to go, Atisa said, offering Thomas an apologetic smile. It was nice meeting you, Thomas. Thank you for listening. As Thomas watched Atisa hurry away with her brother, he felt a deep ache in his chest. The gravity of their situation weighed heavily on him, and he couldn't shake the feeling that their brief encounter was somehow significant. Thomas couldn't shake the encounter with Atisa from his mind. The next week he found himself back at the shelter, hoping to see her again. Sure enough, he spotted her in a corner, surrounded by her siblings. Taking a deep breath, he approached them. Atisa? He called softly. Do you have a moment? Atisa looked up, surprise flickering across her face. Oh, hello, Thomas. Sure, just give me a second. She turned to the oldest boy next to her. Malik, can you watch the little ones for a bit? As Atisa stepped away from her siblings, Thomas noticed the protective glances they cast his way. They followed Atisa to a nearby table, where they sat down. I hope I'm not intruding, Thomas began, but I couldn't stop thinking about what you told me last week. How are you all doing? Atisa's shoulders slumped slightly. It's been tough, she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. We've been bounced around different foster homes since our parents died in a car accident 2 years ago. No one wants to take all 7 of us. Thomas's heart ached at the pain in her eyes. That must be incredibly difficult for all of you. Atisa nodded, blinking back tears. It is, we're all we have left of our family. The thought of being split up. Her voice cracked. I can't bear it. I promised Mom and Dad I'd keep us together, but I don't know how much longer I can fight the system. As Atisa spoke, Thomas found himself captivated by her strength and resilience. Here was a young girl, barely more than a child herself, shouldering the responsibility of 6 younger siblings. The weight of her burden was visible in the worry lines etched on her young face. Can you tell me about your siblings? Thomas asked gently, hoping to shift the conversation to something less painful. A small smile tugged at Atisa's lips. Well, there's Malik. He's 12. He tries to help me as much as he can. Then there's Zuri. She's 10. And Jamal, who's 8. He's the troublemaker you saw last week. The twins, Amara and Amir, are 6 and little Nia is just 5. As Atisa spoke about her siblings, her eyes lit up with love and pride. Thomas could see the deep bond that connected them all, forged by shared loss and the determination to stay together. They sound wonderful, Thomas said softly. You're doing an amazing job looking after them. Atisa's smile faltered. I'm trying, but it's getting harder. The social workers say it's in our best interest to be placed in separate homes, but they don't understand. We need each other. Thomas felt a lump form in his throat as he watched a tear slide down Atissa's cheek. The sadness of their situation, the impending separation that loomed over this tight-knit family, struck him deeply. He thought about his own lonely life, his empty home, and the success that suddenly seemed hollow in comparison to the rich, if troubled bonds these siblings shared. Moments later, as Thomas sat in his car, gripping the steering wheel tightly as he stared at the shelter's entrance, his mind raced with thoughts of Atissa and her siblings. Their story had touched him deeply, stirring something within his heart that he couldn't ignore. He closed his eyes, picturing his spacious home, empty rooms echoing with silence. For years, he had filled that void with work, convincing himself that success was enough. But now, faced with the plight of these 7 children, Thomas realized how hollow his life truly was. "Could I really do this?" he whispered to himself, his voice trembling slightly. The idea of adopting all 7 siblings seemed overwhelming, almost impossible. He was just one man after all, a single, career-focused individual with no experience raising children. Yet the image of Atissa's tear-stained face haunted him. He could still hear the quiver in her voice as she spoke about keeping her family together. Thomas's heart ached at the thought of these children being torn apart, separated from the only family they had left. He took a deep breath, trying to calm his racing thoughts. On one hand, the idea of suddenly becoming a father to 7 children terrified him. How would he manage their daily needs, their education, their emotional well-being? The responsibility seemed immense, almost crushing. But on the other hand, Thomas couldn't deny the warmth that spread through his chest at the thought of filling his home with laughter, love, and the chaos of family life. It was everything he had secretly longed for but never dared to pursue. Am I being selfish? Thomas wondered aloud. Was his desire to adopt these children more about filling the void in his own life than truly helping them? He shook his head, frustrated by his conflicting emotions. Thomas thought about his career, the long hours he spent at the office. How would he balance work and family life? Would he be able to provide the attention and care these children needed? Doubt crept into his mind, whispering that he wasn't cut out for this, that he would fail these children just when they needed stability the most. Yet beneath the fear and uncertainty, a small voice persisted. It reminded him of the love he had seen in Atissa's eyes when she spoke of her siblings, of the strength and resilience these children had shown in the face of tragedy. Perhaps, it whispered, this was his chance to make a real difference, to give these children the home they deserved. Thomas leaned back in his seat, closing his eyes once more. The enormity of the decision weighed heavily on him. He knew that whatever choice he made would irrevocably change his life and the lives of 7 innocent children. The internal conflict raged on, leaving him torn between his fears and his deepest desires. Thomas took a deep breath and pushed open the door to the foster care agency. The waiting room was filled with the soft chatter of families and the rustling of papers. He approached the front desk, his heart pounding in his chest. "I'm here to apply for adoption," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. The receptionist smiled warmly. "Of course, sir. Please fill out these forms and someone will be with you shortly." As Thomas sat down to complete the paperwork, his hand trembled slightly. He paused, staring at the blank spaces where he needed to list the children he wished to adopt. Carefully, he wrote down all 7 names, Atissa, followed by her 6 younger siblings. After what felt like hours, a social worker called his name. "Mr. Matthews? I'm Ms. Johnson. Please come with me." Thomas followed her into a small office decorated with children's artwork and family photos. Ms. Johnson's eyes widened as she glanced at his application. "Mr. Matthews," she began, her tone cautious, "I see you're interested in adopting 7 children?" Thomas nodded, trying to appear more confident than he felt. "Yes, that's correct. They're siblings, and I want to keep them together." Ms. Johnson leaned back in her chair, studying him carefully. "While we appreciate your desire to help, I must be honest with you. Adopting 7 children, especially as a single parent with no prior experience, is an enormous undertaking." Thomas felt his stomach drop, but he pressed on. I understand it won't be easy, but I'm committed to giving these children a loving home. The social worker's expression softened slightly. Your intentions are admirable, Mr. Matthews. However, we need to consider what's best for the children. Raising 7 kids is challenging even for experienced parents. There are financial considerations, emotional needs, and the sheer logistics of daily life to consider. Thomas listened intently, his resolve wavering under the weight of her words. But then he remembered Atisa's face, the fear in her eyes at the thought of being separated from her siblings. I know it sounds overwhelming, Thomas said, his voice growing stronger, but I have the resources to provide for them financially. I'm willing to learn, to do whatever it takes to be the parent they need. Ms. Johnson nodded, but her skepticism was evident. We'll need to conduct a thorough home study, interviews, and background checks. It's a long process, Mr. Matthews, and I want you to understand that approval is far from guaranteed. Thomas felt a mix of hope and nervousness settle in his chest. I understand. I'm ready to do whatever is necessary. As he left the agency, Thomas's mind raced with everything that lay ahead. The road to adoption would be long and uncertain, but for the first time in years, he felt a sense of purpose. He was terrified, yes, but also filled with a determination he hadn't known he possessed. The adoption process stretched on, each day feeling like an eternity to Thomas. He found himself buried in paperwork, his dining room table covered with forms and documents. The social worker's doubts echoed in his mind as he filled out yet another questionnaire. Mr. Matthews, Ms. Johnson had said during their last meeting, her brow furrowed. I'm still concerned about your ability to manage 7 children on your own. Have you really thought this through? Thomas had nodded, his jaw set with determination. I have, Ms. Johnson. I know it won't be easy, but I'm committed to making this work. Despite his confident words, Thomas felt his stomach churn with anxiety. He'd faced countless challenges in his finance career, but none quite like this. The process seemed designed to test his resolve at every turn. Meanwhile, across town in their current foster home, Atisa sat on the edge of her bed, surrounded by her younger siblings. She tried to keep a brave face, but worry gnawed at her insides. When are we going to live with Mr. Thomas? Her youngest brother asked, his eyes wide with hope. Atisa ruffled his hair gently. I don't know, sweetie, these things take time, but Mr. Thomas is trying his best. She glanced around at her siblings, noting the mix of excitement and fear on their faces. The youngest ones barely understood what was happening, but the older ones knew all too well how fragile their situation was. As the weeks turned into months, Thomas faced one roadblock after another. Home inspections, financial audits, character references. Each step of the process seemed designed to make him stumble. But Thomas refused to give up. One particularly trying day, Thomas sat in Ms. Johnson's office, feeling deflated after another round of questioning. Mr. Matthews, Ms. Johnson began, her tone softer than usual. I have to admit, your persistence is admirable. Many would have given up by now. Thomas looked up, a glimmer of hope in his eyes. Does that mean... Ms. Johnson shook her head. We still have a long way to go, but I'm starting to see that your commitment to these children is genuine. Those words, small as they were, gave Thomas the strength to carry on. He left the office with renewed determination, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Back at the foster home, Atisa received a call from Thomas. Her siblings gathered around, eager to hear any news. Hi, Atisa. Thomas's voice crackled through the speaker. I just wanted to check in and let you know I'm still working hard to bring you all home. Atisa felt a lump form in her throat. Thank you, Mr. Thomas. We really appreciate everything you're doing. As she hung up, Atisa looked at her siblings' hopeful faces. She knew the road ahead was still long and uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, they'd found someone who wouldn't give up on them. Thomas sat in stunned silence, the rejection letter clutched in his trembling hands. The words blurred before his eyes, but their meaning was painfully clear. His application to adopt the 7 siblings had been denied. We regret to inform you. The phrase echoed in his mind, each word a dagger to his heart. He slumped back in his chair, the weight of disappointment crushing his chest. Months of effort, sleepless nights, and emotional investment had come to nothing. The reasons given, his single status and lack of parenting experience, seemed to mock him now. "Did I really think I could do this?" Thomas whispered to himself, his voice cracking. He glanced around his spacious living room, once a symbol of his success, now feeling empty and cold. The dream of filling it with the laughter and love of 7 children suddenly seemed foolish and naive. Doubt crept into his mind like a poison. Had he been selfish, thinking he could step in and be a father to these kids? Maybe the social workers were right. What did he know about raising children, let alone 7 of them? Across town, Atissa's phone buzzed with a message from Thomas. Her heart sank as she read his words, each one a blow to the fragile hope she'd been nurturing. "I'm so sorry, Atissa. The application was rejected. I don't know what to do next." Atissa's hands shook as she set the phone down. She looked around the cramped bedroom she shared with her 2 youngest sisters, the reality of their situation crashing down on her. "What's wrong, Atissa?" her little sister asked, noticing the tears welling up in Atissa's eyes. Atissa tried to smile, but it came out as a grimace. "Nothing, sweetie. Everything's fine." But it wasn't fine. Atissa felt a wave of hopelessness wash over her. The fear she'd been holding at bay for months now threatened to overwhelm her. Would they really be split up now? The thought of being separated from her siblings was unbearable. She thought of Thomas, the kind man who had tried so hard to keep them together. A part of her wanted to be angry with him for giving them false hope, but she couldn't. She knew he had done everything he could. As night fell, both Thomas and Atissa found themselves staring out windows, lost in their thoughts. Thomas wondered if he had made a terrible mistake by getting involved, by allowing himself to dream of a family. Atissa, surrounded by her sleeping siblings, fought back tears as she contemplated an uncertain future. The rejection had left them both reeling, their hopes dashed and their faith in the system shaken. As they grappled with their emotions, the future seemed darker than ever before. After a few days, Thomas paced nervously in the waiting room of the foster care board's office. His heart raced as he rehearsed the words he'd prepared. This was his last chance, his final appeal to keep the 7 siblings together. "Mr. Matthews, they're ready for you," a secretary called. Taking a deep breath, Thomas straightened his tie and walked into the boardroom. 5 stern faces greeted him, their expressions unreadable. "Mr. Matthews, you have 10 minutes to state your case," the chairwoman said. Thomas nodded, his mouth dry. He looked down at his notes, then set them aside. This wasn't about facts or figures. It was about heart. "I know I'm not the typical adoptive parent," he began, his voice shaky but growing stronger. "I'm single, I've never raised a child, and I'm asking to adopt 7 at once. But these children, they've changed my life." He told them about meeting Atissa, about the strength he saw in her eyes as she protected her siblings. He spoke of the younger ones, their resilience in the face of loss and uncertainty. "I may not have experience," Thomas said, his eyes welling with tears, "but I have love. I have a home that's been waiting for a family, and I have a promise to give these children the stable, loving home they deserve." The board members exchanged glances as Thomas continued, his words flowing from his heart. "I know it won't be easy," he admitted, "but nothing worth doing ever is. These children deserve to stay together, and I'm committed to making that happen. Please, give us a chance." As Thomas finished, silence filled the room. The chairwoman leaned forward. "Thank you, Mr. Matthews. We'll be in touch with our decision." Days passed, each one a torment of uncertainty for Thomas. He tried to prepare himself for another rejection, but hope stubbornly clung to his heart. Finally, on a sunny Tuesday afternoon, Thomas's phone rang. His hands trembled as he answered. "Mr. Matthews," the chairwoman's voice came through. "We've reconsidered your application." Thomas held his breath, his whole world hanging on her next words. "Your appeal was moving. We've decided to approve your application. You can proceed with the adoption of all 7 siblings." Thomas's knees buckled. He sank into a chair, tears streaming down his face. "Thank you," he whispered. Thank you so much." As soon as he hung up, Thomas dialed Atisa's number, his heart soaring. When she answered, he could barely contain his joy. "Atisa," he said, his voice choked with emotion. "It's happening. We did it. You're all coming home." As the Matthews family settled into their new reality, the initial euphoria of adoption began to fade. Thomas, once riding high on his success in keeping the siblings together, now found himself grappling with the day-to-day challenges of raising 7 children. One morning, as Thomas hurried to get everyone ready for school, chaos erupted in the kitchen. Cereal spilled across the floor, backpacks couldn't be found, and arguments broke out over who got to use the bathroom first. "Malik, please help your younger siblings," Thomas called out, his voice strained as he tried to tie little Naya's shoelaces. Malik, the oldest boy at 14, rolled his eyes. "Why is it always my job?" he muttered, reluctantly helping his younger brother with his backpack. As they piled into the minivan Thomas had recently purchased, he couldn't help but notice the stares from their neighbors. Mrs. Johnson from next door quickly averted her eyes when Thomas waved, hurrying inside her house. At school, Malik and Aisha, 13, faced their own set of challenges. As they walked down the hallway, whispers and pointed looks followed them. "Look at the new kids," one boy sneered. "Guess they come in packs now." Aisha ducked her head, trying to ignore the comments, but Malik's fists clenched at his sides. He wanted to lash out, to defend his family, but he knew it would only make things worse. In class, Aisha raised her hand to answer a question about American history. The teacher, Mr. Peterson, looked surprised. "Oh, Aisha, you know about that?" Aisha felt her cheeks burn with embarrassment. "Yes, sir, I read about it in our textbook." Mr. Peterson nodded, a hint of doubt in his eyes. "Well, good for you." At lunch, Malik and Aisha sat alone, watching as other students whispered and pointed in their direction. Malik pushed his food around his plate, his appetite gone. "I hate it here," he said quietly to Aisha. "Everyone looks at us like we're aliens or something." Aisha nodded, her eyes downcast. "I know. It's like they've never seen a black person before." After school, as Thomas picked them up, he noticed the subdued mood in the car. "How was your day?" he asked, trying to sound cheerful. Silence filled the van. Finally, Niaz, the youngest at 6, spoke up. "Daddy, why do people look at us funny?" Thomas felt his heart sink. He glanced in the rearview mirror, seeing the hurt and confusion on his children's faces. He realized that keeping them together was just the first step. Now, they faced a whole new set of challenges as they tried to find their place in this new world. Atisa watched her siblings with a heavy heart. As the eldest at 13, she felt responsible for shielding them from the harsh realities of their new life. But the weight of this burden was becoming too much to bear. One evening, as Thomas worked late, Atisa tried to help her younger siblings with their homework. Destiny, usually bright and eager to learn, stared blankly at her math book. "Come on, Des," Atisa coaxed gently. "I know you can do this." Destiny shrugged, her eyes distant. "What's the point?" she mumbled. Atisa's heart sank. She knew Destiny was struggling to fit in at school, but seeing her little sister so defeated was painful. Meanwhile, Malik stormed into the house, slamming the door behind him. His face was set in a scowl, his backpack thrown carelessly on the floor. "Malik, what's wrong?" Atisa asked, worry creasing her brow. "Nothing," he snapped. "Just leave me alone." Before Atisa could respond, Malik thundered up the stairs, leaving a trail of tension in his wake. Atisa felt tears prick her eyes. She was trying so hard to keep everyone together, to make this new life work, but it seemed like everything was falling apart. Later that night, Thomas returned home, exhausted from a long day at work. He found Atisa in the kitchen, her head in her hands. "Atisa? What's wrong, sweetheart?" he asked, concern evident in his voice. Atisa looked up, her eyes red-rimmed. "I don't know what to do, Thomas," she confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Destiny's withdrawing. Malik's acting out. I'm trying to hold everyone together, but I can't do it anymore." Thomas's heart ached for the young girl who had been forced to grow up too fast. He sat down beside her, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. "You don't have to do it alone, Atisa," he said softly. "We're a family now. We'll figure this out together." But even as he spoke the words, Thomas felt a twinge of uncertainty. He was trying his best to support his new children, but navigating the complexities of their adjustment was proving to be more challenging than he had anticipated. The next day, Thomas received a call from Malik's school. The principal's voice was stern as he explained that Malik had been in a fight. "Mr. Matthews, we understand that Malik is going through a transition, but this behavior cannot continue," the principal said. Thomas rubbed his forehead, feeling the weight of his responsibilities pressing down on him. "I understand," he replied. "I'll talk to him." As he hung up the phone, Thomas caught sight of Destiny sitting alone in the living room. Her usual spark dimmed. He realized that while he had been focusing on Malik's outbursts, Destiny had been silently struggling. Thomas felt overwhelmed. He wanted so badly to make this work, to give these children the stable home they deserved. But as he looked around at his fractured family, he couldn't help but wonder if he was in over his head. The next day, Thomas sat in the principal's office, his face etched with concern. The meeting about Malik's fight had turned into a broader discussion about the racial prejudice his children were facing at school. "Mr. Matthews, we take these issues very seriously," the principal said, her tone measured. "We're implementing new anti-bullying programs, but change takes time." Thomas nodded, his jaw tight. "I understand, but my children need support now. What can we do in the meantime?" As they discussed strategies, Thomas couldn't help but think of Destiny's withdrawn behavior and Atisa's weary eyes. He knew the bullying was just the tip of the iceberg. Later that week, Thomas ushered his family into a cozy office. Dr. Ramirez, a kind-faced therapist, greeted them warmly. "Welcome, everyone," she said. "I know this might feel strange, but we're here to help you all adjust to your new life together." The younger kids fidgeted nervously, while Malik slouched in his chair, arms crossed. Atisa sat up straight, her eyes darting protectively to each of her siblings. As the session progressed, Dr. Ramirez gently coaxed the children to open up. Destiny spoke softly about feeling different at school, while Malik grudgingly admitted to his anger. Thomas watched, his heart aching. He wanted to fix everything, to erase their pain, but he knew it wasn't that simple. Atisa remained quiet throughout most of the session, her shoulders tense. When Dr. Ramirez asked her how she was coping, Atisa hesitated. "I'm fine," she said, forcing a smile. "I just want everyone else to be okay." Thomas noticed the strain in her voice, the dark circles under her eyes. He realized that in his efforts to help the younger children, he might have overlooked Atisa's struggles. As they left the therapist's office, Thomas gently pulled Atisa aside. "You know, it's okay not to be strong all the time," he said softly. Atisa's eyes welled with tears, but she quickly blinked them away. "I have to be," she whispered. "For them." Thomas wrapped an arm around her shoulders, feeling the weight of her burden. "We're in this together, Atisa. You don't have to carry it all alone." That night, as Thomas tucked the younger kids into bed, he saw glimmers of hope. Destiny gave him a small smile, and even Malik mumbled a "good night." It wasn't much, but it was progress. Still, Thomas knew they had a long road ahead. The therapy sessions and school meetings were just the beginning. As he closed the last bedroom door, he took a deep breath, steeling himself for the challenges to come. As the seasons changed, so did the atmosphere in the Matthews household. The initial tension began to soften, replaced by a growing sense of belonging. Malik found his place on the basketball court. His natural talent blossomed under the guidance of his coach, and soon he was starting in every game. The cheers from the bleachers grew louder with each basket he scored. "Did you see that, Thomas?" Malik called out after a particularly impressive three-pointer. Thomas beamed with pride, clapping enthusiastically from the sidelines. At home, delicious aromas often wafted from the kitchen. Aisha had discovered a passion for baking, filling the house with the scent of fresh cookies and warm bread. "Can I try one?" Thomas asked, eyeing a tray of golden muffins cooling on the counter. Aisha nodded shyly, a small smile playing on her lips as Thomas took a bite. "These are amazing, Aisha. he exclaimed, his eyes widening in delight. The younger children, too, were settling into their new life. Destiny had started to giggle more, her laughter echoing through the house. The twins, once inseparable out of fear, now felt safe enough to explore their individual interests. Thomas watched these changes with a mixture of joy and relief. He savored the moments when the house was filled with laughter and the sound of children playing. Yet, as he sat at his desk late at night, poring over bills and bank statements, a knot of worry tightened in his stomach. The cost of raising 7 children was staggering. There were school supplies to buy, clothes to replace, and endless grocery runs. Thomas had always lived comfortably, but now he found himself stretching his budget thin. He stared at the numbers on the screen, his brow furrowed. The savings he had built up over years were dwindling faster than he had anticipated. Thomas rubbed his temples, feeling the weight of his financial stress pressing down on him. But then, from down the hall, he heard a burst of laughter. It was Malik, probably sharing a joke with Aisha. Thomas's heart swelled, momentarily pushing aside his worries. He knew that no matter the financial strain, the love growing in this family was priceless. 10 years had passed since Thomas Matthews had adopted the 7 siblings, and the once empty house was now filled with the echoes of their shared memories. The children he had taken in had grown into young adults, each carving their own path in life. Atisa, now 26, had found her calling as a social worker. Her own experiences had ignited a passion to help children in foster care, just as she and her siblings had once been helped. She threw herself into her work, her compassionate nature shining through in every case she handled. Malik, with his natural athleticism, had pursued his love for basketball. He was now a semi-professional player, his games drawing crowds that included his proud family. The determination that had once been seen as rebelliousness had transformed into a fierce drive on the court. Aisha's childhood experiments in the kitchen had blossomed into a full-fledged career. She now ran her own bakery, filling the neighborhood with the scent of freshly baked goods. Her quiet demeanor had given way to a confident businesswoman, though she still found the most joy in baking for her family. The younger siblings, too, were finding their way. Some were in college, others exploring trades, but all were pursuing their dreams with the support of their adoptive father and older siblings. Thomas, now in his early 50s, watched his children's successes with immense pride. But behind his warm smile and encouraging words, a heavy burden weighed on his heart. The years of raising 7 children had taken a toll on his finances, and his own health had begun to decline. As he sat at his desk late one night, Thomas stared at the pile of bills before him. The numbers seemed to blur together, each one a stark reminder of the mounting debt he faced. His savings had long since been depleted, and now even keeping up with the mortgage payments was becoming impossible. Thomas rubbed his tired eyes, feeling the weight of his financial struggles pressing down on him. The thought of losing the home that had sheltered so many memories was almost unbearable. Yet, he couldn't bring himself to share this burden with his children. They had already been through so much, and he wanted to protect them from this new hardship. "They've worked so hard to get where they are," Thomas murmured to himself, his voice barely above a whisper. "I can't ask them to give that up now." So he kept his struggles hidden, plastering on a smile whenever his children visited or called. He deflected questions about his health with vague reassurances and changed the subject whenever money came up. But as he looked at the foreclosure notice on his desk, Thomas knew he couldn't keep this secret forever. Thomas sat at the kitchen table, surrounded by a sea of bills and bank statements. The warm glow of the evening sun filtering through the window did little to lift his spirits. His eyes fixed on the foreclosure notice, its bold red letters seeming to mock him. "How did it come to this?" he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. The house around him held so many memories. He could almost hear the echoes of laughter from family dinners, the pitter-patter of little feet running down the hallways, and the countless heartfelt conversations that had taken place within these walls. This wasn't just a house, it was the beating heart of their family. Thomas's gaze drifted to a family photo on the wall. 7 smiling faces looked back at him, reminding him of the journey they had all taken together. The thought of selling this home, of uprooting the very foundation of their family, made his heart ache. Maybe Maybe it's the only way, he murmured, the words tasting bitter on his tongue. But as quickly as the thought came, he pushed it away. How could he even consider selling the home that had given his children stability after years of uncertainty? This house was more than bricks and mortar. It was a symbol of their unity, their strength as a family. Thomas's hands trembled as he picked up the foreclosure notice again. The reality of his situation was becoming impossible to ignore. Years of financial sacrifice to give his children the best life possible had finally caught up with him. His savings were gone, his health was declining, and now even keeping a roof over his head seemed like an insurmountable challenge. Despite the gravity of his situation, Thomas couldn't bring himself to share this burden with his children. The thought of disappointing them, of letting them see him struggle, filled him with shame. They had all worked so hard to overcome their difficult past and build successful lives. How could he now admit that he, the one who was supposed to protect and provide for them, was failing? "They can't know," Thomas said firmly, though his voice quivered. "They've been through enough. I'll figure this out somehow." But even as he said the words, Thomas felt the weight of his secret pressing down on him. It was a constant presence, coloring every interaction with his children. Each time they called or visited, he found himself deflecting questions about his well-being, forcing a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. The burden of his financial struggles and the fear of losing their family home weighed heavily on Thomas's shoulders. He felt trapped, torn between his desire to protect his children from worry and the crushing reality of his situation. As the sun set outside, casting long shadows across the room, Thomas buried his face in his hands, feeling more alone than he had in years. Atisa stepped into Thomas's study, a duster in hand. The room was bathed in soft afternoon light, highlighting the dust particles floating in the air. As she moved around the room, her eyes fell on Thomas's desk, cluttered with papers and folders. "He's been so busy lately," she thought, her brow furrowing with concern. She had noticed the changes in Thomas over the past few months. The dark circles under his eyes, the forced smiles, the way his shoulders seemed to slump when he thought no one was looking. Something was wrong, but every time she asked, he brushed it off with a cheerful, "I'm fine, sweetie, just a bit tired." As Atisa began to tidy the desk, a red envelope caught her eye. It was partially hidden under a stack of papers, but the bold lettering peeked out. Curiosity got the better of her, and she gently pulled it out. Her heart dropped as she read the words "foreclosure notice" at the top of the letter. With trembling hands, she began to sift through the other papers on the desk. Overdue bills, bank statements showing alarmingly low balances, and letters from debt collectors painted a grim picture. "Oh, Dad," Atisa whispered, her voice breaking. Tears welled up in her eyes as the reality of the situation hit her. All these years, Thomas had been their rock, their protector. He had given them a home, love, and stability when they had nothing. And now he was drowning in debt, facing the loss of their family home, and he hadn't said a word to any of them. Atisa sank into Thomas's chair, her mind reeling. How long had he been dealing with this alone? Why hadn't he told them? The thought of Thomas silently carrying this enormous burden broke her heart. She remembered all the times Thomas had encouraged them to pursue their dreams, never complaining about the cost of college tuitions or startup loans. He had always been there, supporting them financially and emotionally, without ever hinting at his own struggles. Atisa's tears fell freely now, dropping onto the papers scattered across the desk. She felt a mix of sadness, guilt, and overwhelming love for the man who had sacrificed so much for them. "We have to help him," she thought, wiping her eyes. "He's not alone in this. We're a family." With newfound determination, Atisa carefully replaced the papers on the desk, her mind already racing with ideas on how to address this crisis. She knew it wouldn't be easy, but she was resolved to stand by Thomas, just as he had always stood by them. Atisa paced nervously in the living room, her heart heavy with the secret she'd discovered. She had called an emergency family meeting, and one by one her siblings filed in, their faces a mix of curiosity and concern. "What's going on, Atisa?" Malik asked, his brow furrowed as he settled onto the couch. Aisha, sensing the tension in the room, reached out and squeezed Atisa's hand. "Is everything okay?" Atisa took a deep breath, her eyes scanning the faces of her brothers and sisters. I found something in Dad's study," she began, her voice trembling. "We're in trouble. Big trouble." She slowly explained what she had discovered: the foreclosure notice, the mounting bills, and Thomas's dire financial situation. As she spoke, the room fell silent, the weight of her words settling over them like a heavy blanket. "But how?" Aisha whispered, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Dad never said anything." Malik stood up abruptly, his fists clenched at his sides. "All this time he's been struggling and we didn't even notice?" His voice was thick with emotion. The younger siblings huddled together on the couch, their faces a mix of shock and worry. Destiny, the youngest, began to cry softly. "Why didn't he tell us?" Malik demanded, pacing the room. "We could have helped." Atisa shook her head, her own eyes brimming with tears. "You know, Dad, he didn't want to burden us. He's always put us first, even when it meant sacrificing everything." The room fell silent as the reality of the situation sank in. This house, the place where they had found love and stability after years of uncertainty, was at risk. It wasn't just a building, it was their sanctuary, the symbol of their family's unity. Aisha stood up, her face set with determination. "We can't let this happen. We have to do something." Malik nodded, his earlier anger giving way to resolve. "Aisha's right. Dad's given us everything. It's our turn to step up." One by one, the siblings voiced their agreement. They were no longer the helpless children Thomas had taken in all those years ago. They were adults now, capable of making a difference. "But what can we do?" Destiny asked, wiping her tears. Atisa looked around at her siblings, feeling a surge of pride and love. "I don't know yet," she admitted, "but we're going to figure it out. Together. We're not letting Dad face this alone anymore." As they began to brainstorm ideas, a new energy filled the room. They were determined to save their home and help the man who had saved them all those years ago. Thomas had given them a family. Now it was their turn to show him what that really meant. The Matthews siblings gathered around the dining room table, a place that had seen countless family meals and discussions over the years. Now it served as their war room, where they planned their strategy to save their home. Malik, his face set with determination, spoke first. "I've been thinking," he said, his voice steady. "I can use some of my basketball earnings to help. It's not a fortune, but it's something." Aisha nodded, her eyes bright with purpose. "And I can contribute the profits from the bakery. Business has been good lately, and this is more important than any expansion plans I had." The younger siblings chimed in, each offering what they could. Destiny, now a college student, volunteered to take on more hours at her part-time job. The twins, James and Jamal, offered to sell their gaming consoles. Atisa felt a lump form in her throat as she looked at her siblings. They had come so far from the scared, uncertain children they once were. Now they were a united front, ready to fight for their family. "Every little bit helps," Atisa said, her voice filled with emotion. "We'll need to create a budget, figure out exactly how much we need to raise." As they discussed their plans, a sense of urgency mixed with love filled the room. They knew the task ahead was daunting, but the alternative, losing the home that had sheltered them for over a decade, was unthinkable. Aisha pulled out a notebook and began jotting down ideas. "Maybe we could organize a community fundraiser," she suggested. "I could bake for it, and Malik, you could use your local celebrity status to draw people in." Malik nodded enthusiastically. "That's a great idea. I could even see if some of my teammates would be willing to help out." As the siblings continued to brainstorm, their voices overlapping with excitement and determination, Atisa felt a surge of hope. They were no longer helpless children. They were a family united in their love for each other and for Thomas. "We need to be careful," Atisa reminded them gently. "We don't want Dad to find out what we're doing just yet. He might try to stop us." The others nodded in agreement. They understood Thomas's pride, his desire to protect them even at his own expense. But now, it was their turn to be the protectors. As the meeting wound down, each sibling left with a sense of purpose and a list of tasks. They had a long way to go, but they were determined to succeed. The house that Thomas had made a home for them would not be lost, not if they had anything to say about it. Atisa took a deep breath as she dialed the bank's number. Her siblings gathered around her, their faces a mix of hope and anxiety. As a social worker, Atisa had experience dealing with difficult situations. But this felt different. This was personal. "Hello, this is Atisa Matthews," she said when the call connected. "I'm calling about my father's mortgage." The bank representative listened as Atisa explained their situation. She spoke clearly and calmly, her voice steady despite the emotions churning inside her. "We understand the difficulty of your situation," the representative said, "but our policies are quite strict." Malik, sitting next to Atisa, couldn't contain himself. "Please," he interjected, his voice filled with urgency. "This isn't just a house. It's our home. It's where we became a family." The representative paused, then sighed. "I'll see what I can do, but I can't make any promises." Over the next few days, Atisa and Malik made call after call. They sent emails, filled out forms, and refused to give up. Each time they were met with hesitation or rejection, they pushed harder. Meanwhile, Aisha threw herself into her bakery work with renewed vigor. She extended the shop's hours, introduced new products, and reached out to local businesses for catering opportunities. The stress showed on her face, but her determination never wavered. Every extra dollar counts, she reminded herself as she kneaded dough late into the night. The younger siblings weren't idle either. Destiny picked up extra shifts at her campus job, coming home exhausted but proud of her contribution. James and Jamal, true to their word, sold their gaming consoles and took on odd jobs in the neighborhood. As the days turned into weeks, the Matthews siblings' efforts began to show results. Aisha's bakery saw an uptick in sales, and the money they were able to set aside slowly grew. But the bank remained a stubborn obstacle. Despite Atisa and Malik's persistence, they struggled to make headway. Each rejection felt like a blow, but they refused to accept defeat. "We're not giving up," Atisa said firmly after another disappointing call. "We'll find a way. We always have." Malik nodded, his jaw set with determination. "Maybe we need to go down there in person," he suggested. "Make them see we're more than just a case number." As they planned their next move, the Matthews siblings knew they were in for a tough fight. But looking around at each other, they felt a surge of strength. They had faced challenges before and come out stronger. This time would be no different. On afternoon, Thomas Matthews sat at his desk, his eyes heavy with exhaustion as he pored over yet another stack of bills. The lamp cast a soft glow over the papers, but it did little to brighten his mood. He rubbed his temples, trying to ward off the headache that had become his constant companion. "There has to be a way," he muttered to himself, his voice barely above a whisper. Outside his study, he could hear the muffled sounds of his children talking and laughing. The sound usually filled him with joy, but now it only intensified his worry. He couldn't bear the thought of letting them down, of losing the home that had sheltered their family for so long. Thomas reached for his phone, scrolling through his contacts. He'd been calling old colleagues, distant acquaintances, anyone who might be able to offer a loan or financial advice. But each call left him feeling more desperate than the last. As he dialed another number, a cough racked his body. He covered his mouth, trying to stifle the sound. When the fit passed, he noticed his hand trembling. Thomas knew his health was suffering, but he pushed the thought aside. There was no time to worry about that now. The call went to voicemail, and Thomas hung up without leaving a message. He leaned back in his chair, closing his eyes for a moment. The weight of his secret felt crushing, but he forced a smile onto his face as he heard a knock at the door. "Dad?" Atisa's voice called out. "We're about to have dinner. Are you joining us?" Thomas took a deep breath, composing himself. "Of course, sweetheart, I'll be right there." He quickly shuffled the papers into a drawer, hiding the evidence of his financial struggles. As he stood up, a wave of dizziness washed over him, but he steadied himself against the desk. Walking into the dining room, Thomas plastered on a smile. The sight of his children gathered around the table, plates piled high with Aisha's latest culinary creation, warmed his heart. For a moment, he could almost forget the looming threat of foreclosure. "Everything okay, Dad?" Malik asked, his brow furrowed with concern. Thomas nodded, taking his seat at the head of the table. "Just a busy day at work," he lied smoothly. "Nothing to worry about." As the conversation flowed around him, Thomas found himself struggling to keep up. His mind kept drifting back to the bills, to the ticking clock of the foreclosure notice. But he forced himself to laugh at Jamal's jokes, to ask Destiny about her classes, to compliment Aisha on the meal. Throughout dinner, Thomas couldn't shake the feeling of hopelessness that had taken root in his chest. But looking at the faces of his children, he knew he had to keep fighting. He would find a way to save their home, no matter the cost to himself. As the days ticked by, the Matthews siblings worked tirelessly to save their family home. The looming foreclosure deadline hung over them like a dark cloud, but it only fueled their determination. Late one night, Atisa gathered her brothers and sisters in the living room. The soft glow of a single lamp cast long shadows across their worried faces. Malik, fresh from basketball practice, still wore his sweaty jersey. Aisha's hands were dusted with flour from her long shift at the bakery. "Okay, team," Atisa said, her voice low to avoid waking Thomas. "We're running out of time. What's our progress?" Malik leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "I've picked up 3 more coaching gigs this week. It's not much, but every little bit helps, right?" Aisha nodded, her eyes tired but determined. "The bakery's been crazy busy. I've been staying late every night to fill extra orders. I think we can bump up our contribution." The younger siblings chimed in with their own updates. Jamal had been mowing lawns in the neighborhood, while Destiny had started tutoring after school. Even little Nia had set up a lemonade stand, proudly adding her earnings to their growing fund. As Atisa listened to her siblings, a lump formed in her throat. She thought back to the day Thomas had first brought them home, how scared and unsure they'd all been. But Thomas had never wavered, never given up on them. He'd worked tirelessly to give them a loving home and a chance at a better life. "We can't let him down," Atisa said softly, her voice thick with emotion. "Dad's done so much for us. It's our turn to take care of him." The others nodded in agreement, their faces set with determination. They'd come so far as a family, overcoming countless obstacles together. This was just one more challenge to face head-on. "I've been crunching the numbers," Atisa continued, pulling out a well-worn notebook. "If we keep up this pace, we might just make it. But it's going to be close." Malik stood up, pacing the room. "We need to do more. I'll see if I can pick up some extra shifts at the gym. Maybe even sell some of my old trophies. And I can start offering baking classes at the shop," Aisha added. "People are always asking me to teach them." As the siblings brainstormed more ideas, their voices grew more animated. The energy in the room was palpable, a mix of hope and fierce determination. Atisa looked around at her family, her heart swelling with pride. They'd come so far from those scared kids in the foster system. Thomas had given them more than just a home. He'd given them the strength to face any challenge together. "We're going to do this," Atisa said, her voice steady and sure. "For Dad. For our family." The others nodded, their faces set with resolve. As they continued to plan and strategize late into the night, Atisa felt a glimmer of hope. They were the Matthews family, and together, they could overcome anything. As the deadline approached, the Matthews siblings worked tirelessly to gather the funds needed to save their family home. Their combined efforts had paid off, and they finally had enough to cover the outstanding mortgage debt. On the day before the foreclosure was set to take place, Atisa made a discreet visit to the bank. Her heart pounded as she approached the teller, a manila envelope clutched tightly in her hands. "I'd like to make a payment on the Matthews family mortgage," she said, her voice steady despite her nerves. The teller looked at her curiously but processed the transaction. As Atisa watched the numbers change on the screen, relief washed over her. The debt was cleared, and their home was safe. Back at the house, the siblings gathered in Atisa's room, their faces a mix of exhaustion and excitement. "It's done," Atisa whispered, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "We did it." Malik pulled her into a tight hug, and soon all the siblings were embracing, their laughter muffled to avoid alerting Thomas. "So what do we tell Dad?" Aisha asked, wiping her eyes. Atisa shook her head. "Nothing yet. You know how he is. He'd feel guilty if he knew we did this." The others nodded in agreement. They all knew how much pride Thomas took in providing for them, how he'd sacrificed everything to give them a stable home. "Let's let him think he found a solution," Malik suggested. "It'll mean more to him that way." They all agreed, deciding to keep their involvement a secret for now. They would find a way to let Thomas believe he had solved the problem on his own. As they dispersed, each going back to their rooms, Atisa lingered for a moment. She looked around at the walls that had sheltered them for so long, feeling a profound sense of gratitude. Thanks to their united efforts, this house would continue to be their home, a testament to the strength of their family bond. The next morning, Thomas woke up feeling lighter than he had in months. The weight of financial worry that had been crushing him seemed to have lifted overnight. He couldn't explain it, but somehow things felt different. As he made his way downstairs, he heard hushed voices coming from the kitchen. He recognized Atisa and Malik's tones, their words muffled but urgent. Thomas paused at the bottom of the stairs, not wanting to interrupt what seemed like a private conversation. "We can't keep this from Dad forever," Malik was saying. "He's bound to find out sooner or later." Atisa sighed. "I know, but you saw how happy he looked this morning. Let's just give him a few more days to enjoy the relief." Thomas's brow furrowed in confusion. What were they talking about? Malik's voice grew louder. "Atisa, we all pitched in to save this house. We should be proud of that. Dad should know how much we love him, how much this home means to all of us." Thomas felt his heart skip a beat. Save the house? His children had done what? I know, Atisa replied softly. "It's just, Dad's always been the one taking care of us. I don't want him to feel like he failed somehow." Thomas leaned against the wall, his legs suddenly weak. The realization hit him like a tidal wave. His children, his wonderful, amazing children, had come together to save their home. They had pooled their resources, worked behind his back, all to keep the roof over their heads. Tears welled up in Thomas's eyes. He thought of all the nights he'd spent awake, worrying about how he would keep his family together, how he would maintain the stability he'd promised them all those years ago. And all this time they had grown into adults who were not only capable of taking care of themselves, but of taking care of him too. Unable to contain his emotions any longer, Thomas stepped into the kitchen. Atisa and Malik fell silent, their eyes wide with surprise. "Dad," Atisa started, but Thomas held up his hand. "I heard," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I heard what you all did." Malik stood up straighter, ready to defend their actions. "Dad, we couldn't just sit by and—" But Thomas cut him off by pulling both Atisa and Malik into a tight embrace. His tears flowed freely now, soaking into their shirts. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice cracking. "Thank you both, and thank your siblings for me." Atisa and Malik returned the hug, their own eyes glistening with tears. "We love you, Dad," Atisa said softly. "You've given us everything. It was our turn to give back." Thomas pulled back, looking at his children with pride and love overwhelming his heart. He saw in their faces not just the scared, vulnerable kids he had adopted all those years ago, but strong, compassionate adults who embodied everything he had ever hoped to instill in them. Thomas stood in the kitchen, his body shaking with emotion as he held Atisa and Malik close. The realization of what his children had done for him overwhelmed his senses, and he found himself unable to hold back the tears that flowed freely down his cheeks. I don't know what to say," Thomas choked out, his voice barely above a whisper. "You've saved our home. You've saved everything we've built together." Atisa gently rubbed her father's back, her own eyes brimming with tears. "Dad, you gave us a home when no one else would. You kept us together when the world wanted to tear us apart. This was the least we could do." Malik nodded in agreement, his usual tough exterior crumbling as he watched his father's raw emotion. "We're a family, Dad. We take care of each other." Thomas pulled back slightly, looking at his two eldest children with a mixture of pride and awe. "But how? How did you manage this?" Just then, the rest of the siblings filed into the kitchen, drawn by the commotion. Aisha, carrying a tray of freshly baked muffins, set it down on the counter and joined the group hug. "We all pitched in, Dad," she explained softly. "My bakery, Malik's basketball earnings, everyone's savings. We couldn't bear the thought of losing our home." The younger siblings nodded, their faces a mix of sheepish smiles and teary eyes. Thomas looked around at each of his children, his heart swelling with love. I never expected this. When I adopted you all, I only wanted to give you the love and stability you deserved. I never imagined you'd repay me in such a profound way." Destiny, the youngest, squeezed into the group hug. "You taught us what family means, Dad. This is what you've shown us all these years, that we stick together no matter what." Thomas felt his knees weaken, overwhelmed by the love surrounding him. His children, no, these amazing adults, had come together to save not just the house, but the very foundation of their family. The love he had poured into them over the years had come full circle, returning to him tenfold. As they stood there, arms intertwined, tears flowing freely, Thomas realized that their bond was stronger than ever. The challenges they had faced, the obstacles they had overcome, all of it had led to this moment of pure, unconditional love. "Thank you," Thomas whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Thank you all for everything. I love you so much." The kitchen filled with murmured "I love yous" and sniffles as the Matthews family held each other tight, their hearts beating as one. As the sun began to set, casting a warm glow through the kitchen windows, Aisha clapped her hands together. "All right, everyone, dinner's almost ready. Let's set the table and gather round." The Matthews family bustled about, working in perfect harmony as they prepared for their meal. Thomas watched with pride as his children moved effortlessly around each other, setting plates, pouring drinks, and bringing steaming dishes to the table. Once everything was ready, they all took their seats, the familiar creaks of chair legs against the hardwood floor a comforting sound. Thomas sat at the head of the table, his heart full as he looked at the faces of his children, now young adults, gathered around him. "Before we eat," Atisa said, her voice filled with excitement, "we have something for you, Dad." Malik reached behind him and produced a small, wrapped package. He handed it to Thomas with a grin. "Go on, open it." Thomas carefully unwrapped the gift, his hands trembling slightly. As the paper fell away, he found himself staring at a beautifully framed family portrait. All 8 of them were there, smiling brightly, their love for each other evident in their eyes. But it was the plaque beneath the photo that made Thomas's breath catch in his throat. Engraved in elegant script were the words, "Built by love, held together by faith." "Oh my goodness," Thomas whispered, his voice thick with emotion. He ran his fingers gently over the frame, tracing each beloved face. Destiny leaned in, her eyes sparkling. "Do you like it, Dad?" Thomas nodded, unable to speak for a moment. When he finally found his voice, it was husky with unshed tears. "I love it. It's perfect, just like all of you." Aisha raised her glass. "To family," she said, her smile bright. "To family," everyone echoed, clinking their glasses together. As they began to eat, the conversation flowed easily, punctuated by laughter and playful teasing. Stories from their past bubbled up, bringing both tears and smiles. "Remember when Malik tried to teach us all how to dribble?" Atisa chuckled. "I think we broke at least 3 vases that day." Malik groaned good-naturedly. "Hey, I was just trying to share my skills." Thomas laughed, shaking his head. "I thought the house was going to come down around our ears that day." As he listened to his children reminisce, Thomas felt a deep sense of pride wash over him. These incredible young adults, with their compassion, their resilience, and their unwavering love for each other, had grown from the scared, uncertain children he'd first met all those years ago. Looking around the table, at the faces lit with joy and the new family portrait standing proudly on the sideboard, Thomas knew that their future was bright. The Matthews family, once teetering on the edge of being torn apart, now sat together, united by love, faith, and the home they'd all worked so hard to save. If you enjoyed the story of Thomas, Atisa, and her siblings, I hand-picked this next story that will touch your heart. Please don't miss this one. Click here to watch it.